This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to episode 225 of the Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid-state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many, many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid-state, turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's at geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I have Tina Clements, and she is the author of a book called The Art of Facilitation. She's also worked to launch a joint venture with BMW called the Retail Performance Group, which she's worked with BMW for quite some time now, and she's a vice president over there. And she is a more energetic than I am, I'm sure, a better communicator than I am, I'm sure, a keynote speaker, author, and a coach. She's done a lot of great work that we're going to be talking about. And one of the reasons why I definitely wanted her to come on the show was to talk about communication, because I struggle with that. And I know a lot of our tech leaders also struggle with communication. But anyway, we'll get into that a little bit. Tina, welcome to the show.
John, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on the show.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience just a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are today, and what are the things that you're working with today?
Luck and relationships, I think, would define my path. I've always been in the people business. Even on paper, you might argue that I've been in the tech business myself, and the entertainment business, and the car business. However, it has always been, the red thread has always been people. I started right out of school. I worked for a radio cable station and really cut my teeth and working in a crazy / challenging environment, very lean, had to learn, everyone had to wear every single hat. And from there went into HBO. And that is where I learned about learning and development and stand-up facilitation and content development on the fly. And from there, Volkswagen tapped me and said, hey, you're doing a good job over there. Why don't you come over here and do the same thing? And I said, yes, while the question mark was still hanging in the air, ready, fire, aim, as usual, and started to facilitate about what was the first thing? I think it was about torque ratio on a differential on a new product. I couldn't spell car, and I was in a tent. So I learned it, and it was really, again, it cut my teeth in a completely different way. And from there went to BMW, sales training manager there, then the Mini training manager, because the BMW brand owns Mini, Rolls-Royce, and Motorrad, the motorcycle group as well. And that's when human resources came a-calling. And that really flipped all of those years of focusing on educating adults and learning theories and stand-up facilitation and communication to how do you put this into practice and really the back end of performance management and talent management. And it taught me the art of giving feedback and listening actively. And I will tell you, John, I thought I understood all that before coming into human resources. Boy, was I wrong. And then same exact story when the Retail Performance Company, which is a 50/50 joint venture with the BMW Group, they tapped me to launch RPC 8 years ago. Again, I thought, well, how hard could this be? I know training, coaching, consulting, data, and analytics. Of course, I can start a company that supports all of that. And once again, had to shift and learn so many new things. And it was all of the education around how to artfully communication that honestly saved me and allowed me to find success in an environment where I had no clue what I was doing. So The path was a bit circuitous, and again, lots of failures along the path to get me to where I am today. But again, there was always that red thread of working with, supporting, driving, and understanding people to help them elevate up and out and blow through their obstacles. Wow, thanks for allowing me to go down that memory lane journey, brother. That was fun.
So what are some of the lessons that you learned going through different groups? I know working in media is very different, but yet, because you have creatives, you have other things that you have to deal with, you have a different environment, but what are some of the things that you've learned about how to successfully communicate with different people? And the reason why I ask that is because in technology, whether you're a developer or an engineer or a help desk technician, you're going to be working with different people in different areas of the business, and you have to know how to artfully communicate with all of those people. So if you don't mind, just tell a little bit about what are some of the things that you learned going through that process?
Well, two things jump to mind when you ask that question. The first one is not everyone communicates like I do. And back in my youth, when I was such a wee toddler just starting out, that was a horrible Irish accent. I have no idea why I did that. No disrespect to anyone from listening. When years ago, I truly was so naive to believe that my desire for speed, my rapidness in my speech and how I communicated, my urgency around certain things is exactly how everyone else showed up. And that, I think, is lesson number one. Everyone is different. Every human is different. When you are artfully trying to get your message across, one of the first things you'll need to assess is who's my audience and what's their learning style? What's their behavior style? Two different things, by the way. And there are cues to be able to, because sometimes we only have a minute to really figure all that out, and we have to shift. Even when we've prepared for months, sometimes a certain type of communication, and we realize when we walk in, oh my God, the audience is totally different. I just prepared all these details, and I have an audience that could care less about the details. I've got to get in and get out. I need to know how to shift. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is lesson for sure. Number one is to know your audience and know that they probably don't communicate the way you do, and you need to shift and change to meet their needs.
When I think about that lesson, one of the things that I've seen and also has affected me is sometimes is my ego will get in the way a little bit. And I think, well, they should understand what I'm saying. They should get this, they're just not, they're not as smart as me. So they need to figure it out. We're paying them big bucks. They should be able to listen.
Yep.
So how can I change my mindset a little bit so that I realize that effectiveness is more important than just my ego at that point?
That is a fabulous question that extends beyond just your audience, right? This is life. And the question I would stop and ask yourself when you're feeling that, and you have every right to feel that way, it's why are you not taking my advice? You asked for my advice. You're paying me to be here. The question to stop and ask yourself is, how's that working out for me? How's that working out for me to spend all this energy to be swimming around in victim state? And that's when you feel as if you're at the receiving end of a negative force, right? You're a victim to something. You're really not. It's just that's other person's interpretation. That's their stuff. So stop and go, all right, so how's that working out for me? And why is my ego? Why is it rearing up right now? What's really going on for me? It's not an easy question or a couple of questions to ask yourself, but really that's what's going on. Okay, so why do we care? Why do we care so much? Okay, hold on. So that's number one, is just to stop and check, because there's always 5 choices when you hit that ego flare up, when you hit that obstacle, when you hit that wall, however you want to define it. The pandemic hit. Who the hell could have been able to prepare for that, right? But it hit. We have 5 choices every single time. And one of those choices is to behave the exact way that you just defined, which is to remain a victim to it, to be in the blame game, to be angry about it, whatever it is, emotionally push back. The other 5 choices would be to, 1, maybe shift your perspective around it. Stop. So what's going on for this other person? Why are they not believing me? Why are they coming at me? Whatever the thing is. And start to shift your perspective around how the other person is showing up or the situation is showing up. Another choice 3, so victim, shift your perspective, could be to accept it as it is. Now, acceptance is not easy, because acceptance means you're not talking about it anymore, you're not thinking about it anymore, and you move on. So it's easier said than done. Choice 4 is to change it, to actually actively do something to change it. And choice 5 is to leave it. which I always advise any executive that I am coaching personally. When you run from something, well, are you running from something or to something? Because wherever you go, that's where you are. So leaving it is always a choice, but you have to really understand the consequence before we make that choice. So there's when there is a process when we get in our own way, and that's really the best way to say it, is to stop and go, what's really going on for me right now? What choice am I making in this moment, and how's that working out for me?
So I think more often than not, I find myself getting in my own way.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see it till it's too late, till like I'm past it. How can I proactively stay out of my own way when it comes to, whether it's meeting with executives, whether it's trying to get buy-in on a new project or pushing back on a project? Because, obviously in tech, that's one of the things we have to do is we have to, validate ROIs on things in certain aspects and say, you really don't need this tool because it costs so much money and you're not going to get that much value out of it.
Mm-hmm.
How can I proactively stay out of my way when those kind of situations come up?
Well, I'll give you a lot of credit because the first thing to do is to do exactly what you're doing, which is to ask about it and to dive into it a little bit. Because what you're admitting right now is that you can be defensive or reactive or react to, right? And that's a big, really, it's massive, John, to even say that out loud. Say, yes, I could show up like this. So that would be step one. And I don't say that contritely to your audience. It's really big to stop. I cannot tell you how many humans with whom I have worked who are uncoachable because they're so swimming around in their own fear and their own limiting beliefs that they won't admit they need help and they won't admit that they're emotional. P.S. Business is all emotion. I don't care what anybody says, by the way, right? So that's step one, what you're doing. Step two would be this. And my old mentor, God bless him, used to say to me, Tina, if you can predict it, you can prepare for it. It's like working at the, where do you go to get your license renewed? At the DMV. Thank you. Yeah. Hi, I'm a professional speaker. I can't even remember DMV. That's fantastic. It's like somebody who works at the DMV getting upset when someone comes in to get their license renewed for getting all their paperwork. It's going to happen. That DMV employee can predict it. If they want to choose to be in victim mode, oh, can you believe it? That person isn't prepared. Of course they're not prepared. This is the job, right? So if you can predict, John, and when you go in to present something, exactly the pushback that you're going to get, probably. You can guess. So if we can predict it, then we can prepare not only to overcome objections, but most importantly, we can then prepare ourselves. And I'll give you the perfect example. This is a few years ago now for RPC, I had to fly overseas and pitch an idea. Now I know these men and women in Munich. In this case, it was in Munich, and it's a global organization. So I was completely aware that they feel my American ideas are a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs a lot of times, right? So I prepared myself. However, I forgot to prepare myself emotionally. And I went through the shtick when I was there, and I know them all very well. We actually, quite frankly, we love each other and we have a great deal of respect for each other, but I know how they show up. And I felt, between you, me, and the audience, I felt embarrassed because they publicly, they had a lot of pushback. And instead of doing what I knew was the right thing to do, which was to say, okay, that's great. Thank you for your feedback. Help me understand where you got your data or whatever I know to say, I got wildly defensive. And when it was all over, of course, I handled it diplomatically and all the things, and everything is totally fine. But I got back on the plane on the way over and I went, you dum-dum. Now I beat myself up for a couple of minutes and then I went, okay, so what really happened there? I didn't prepare. I did not prepare myself for what I knew was going to happen to me emotionally when they squashed my ideas. And I knew they were going to squash my ideas because that's how they roll. So I should have known better. So that was a very long way story, not even a sexy story, but a story to say, I knew to predict it, but I chose not to prepare for it for whatever reason. And that really is the best advice that I can give because it's going to happen. It's going to happen, John. You're going to walk into a situation and with a perfectly, and most likely you are thorough, detail-oriented. You do your analysis and research and you have the correct answer, but yet somebody will be able to poke a hole in it and they'll be wrong. And that now it's your job to have to, right? Is that something that's probably happened? Now you've got to go, oh,
Yep.
I understand, right? I will give you another little tidbit that works. When somebody does that and they do it without, and especially if they do it in front of everyone, and I knew this at the time with my company, a great question to ask is of course, acknowledge and validate. Well, I can see you've done some research also. Can you help me by telling me where you got your data? And then just shut up and just be quiet. Because 9 times out of 10, there is no data to back up the pushback, at least in my experience. So and do it with respect and curiosity. Can you just help me understand? Because my data proves X, and now you're telling me that you disagree or it's not. So can you just help me understand from where you got your research and your data? It has worked for me when I choose to use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, what happens if they get defensive? Like when you ask that question, because I know sometimes when you're asking people you're almost asking them to prove it, Yep. And, and they may end up getting defensive at that point. And, we're trying to, get to the middle ground. We're trying not to be a jerk. And sometimes it's really hard for me not to be a jerk whenever I feel like I'm, they're squashing my ideas, like you were saying, or they're going to throw this away. And I think back to like, what's that movie? 8 Mile, the movie with Eminem, where he's rap battling, and he knows they're all going to like say the things that they're going to say about him. So he puts all that up front and says it about himself.
Yes.
Is that a tactic that we can use? And if so, how do we prepare for that?
That's the predicted prepare for it tactic, right? If you can put all that up front and say, so I'm guessing the question you're going to ask is X. So I'm asking the question on your behalf. Boom, click. I always do my pretend clickety clack, right? Like you're working from a PowerPoint. Click, click. So here's the question I'm going to ask. Click. Here's the answer to that. Here's, for sure, that's a way to diffuse before the bomb, the bomb's even envisioned, right? 100%. What you're defining, honestly, is a heckler. And hecklers heckle for a few different reasons. So especially if you're actually presenting ideas to more than 6 people, you're at a boardroom, you're in a conference, whatever it is, a heckler will heckle because they want to be seen. Sometimes a person just wants to be validated and seen. Sometimes the heckle could come just as an interruption. John, I have the answer. Well, let me tell you what's right. That they want to be, they just want to be loved, right? That's it. Or the heckle can come from as a, well, that's stupid. Well, that's totally wrong. So it could be that they just want to be acknowledged and validated. The other reason that people sometimes heckle it has nothing to do with you and what's going on and the course that you're facilitating or the presentation that you're making. Something else is going on in their world and it needs to be acknowledged, right? So the challenge here is, what's the motivation for the heckle? Now, in the middle of it, you don't have time to figure that out, right? So you just have to handle, I hate using that word, you have to heal the heckler, so to speak. So there's a few different tactics. If somebody's really interrupting you, like you were saying, and you've been asked to do something and present it from an IT perspective, right? And they're interrupting, then very calmly, now this is where it gets hard because you too are going to be emotional. This goes back to what we said before. So to calmly go, I appreciate the feedback, even though maybe you want to throttle them physically, right? You have to, that's great. I appreciate your feedback through clenched teeth. So can you help me understand? That's where you ask the question. It goes against from what I've researched. So can you help me understand where you get your data? What you've just done is taken the wind out of that heckler's tires, because most of the time it's an emotional heckle. It's not based in fact. Now, if it isn't, that's, bring it. If you have data and the facts to disprove or not support what I'm saying, well, then it's actually important, John, and everyone, that person says something. Maybe you don't like the way that person is communicating, but it's okay. So let's talk about this. And you stay calm. The worst thing you can do if somebody else is getting upset is that you rise to it. Don't ever give them the satisfaction of that. Be the leader, be responsible, be respectable, and keep it calm.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think staying calm is one of the it's one of the least talked about things that is super important when it comes to leadership, whether it's during a crisis where servers are down, or you're getting hit with ransomware, or somebody just doesn't like your idea and they're, throwing shade. They're being like a jerk to you in the conference room, or they're pointing out all of your failures, or every time your project was late, or whatever else you did that was wrong. Staying calm is probably one of the more important skills of figuring out how you can do that and do it effectively, because your mind works better when you're calm. People listen to you more when you're calm. You don't make a fool of yourself as much when you're calm. There's lots of things that come about with being calm. Do you have any tips that will help someone in the heat of the moment to maybe step back and regather that calmness?
Step one that works for me is to really consciously stop, take a breath, and remember, this probably doesn't have anything to do with me. Probably. Most of the time, again, something else is going on. And again, from my experience, the upper management and executives that I have worked with, when they fly off the handle, it's coming from their own noise. It's coming from that little voice in their head that's either just a belief system that they have about themselves. Sometimes it's a strong noise that's saying, I'm too stupid to be talking about IT. I don't know enough about it. That's really what it could be. And they want to prove their worth. And especially in the world of IT, I mean, it's a whole different language. It's a whole different skill set. And you and I had a very quick conversation before we jumped on. I really had to learn I had to build my relationship with my IT family when I was at the BMW organization, because I can't spell IT. I had to admit that, right? And I had a couple of choices. I could change it and go learn it, but that wasn't going to, the consequence of that was time and energy that I didn't want to spend. So I needed my brothers and sisters in IT, right? So I had to be okay being the dum-dum in the room. And for a lot of top dogs, that is not a safe space for them. And so they pounce and they react and they try to blow out your candles to make theirs shine brighter, to prove their worth. So does that make any sense? Did I explain that okay, John?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. It's real. It is definitely a reality. Now the question is, how are you going to handle it? How is anyone? And in the world of IT, there's a whole spectrum of humans, right? There's, as a matter of fact, down the hall from my office right now, there's a group of humans who are doing nothing but back end, and they are, quite frankly, never ever seen. But they are such a great group of human beings, but they're not presenting anything, but yet they're still not, they're feeling some of what you and I are talking about right now, right? And then there are another layer of people who actually work with the employees, and they're seen every single day and twice on Sunday, right? And they're the ones who are taking the brunt of so much of this conversation that we're having. So it's real. It's definitely a real, and it's a good question that you asked too, I got to tell you.
Well, thanks. If you don't mind, give me some information or some help when it comes to giving feedback, because that's one of the things that I struggle with, and I know a lot of tech leaders, we struggle with giving feedback, whether it be positive or negative, to employees.
Giving feedback is also an art, and step number one is to do it. Please, I'm begging you as a leader. I really was able to hone my skill set around facilitating the art of giving feedback when I was in human resources, quite frankly, out of necessity, because I realized that the leaders within the organization just weren't doing it. And the reason they weren't doing it is because they were afraid. Most of the ones that were not doing it is they just didn't want to hurt their employees' feelings, which is such the antithesis. That's so the opposite of why we give feedback in the first place. So step number one is to do it, and do it with consistency, and do it frequently. And when we should do it is when we see it, positive and constructively. So if you see somebody doing something well, do the, hey, can I talk to you for a second? What do you think went well there? I agree, man. That was really good. Specifically X, Y, and Z. This is what, keep doing that. Conversely, when somebody's doing something, and we can take it as simple as somebody's late. Somebody's, back in the day when we all used to come into work, somebody's late to the office. It's a, hey, got a minute? Come and talk to me. And number one, when you're setting up a performance conversation, try not to set up the conversation and then have it a week later, because what you have just done is provided your employee a week of stress and pain and anxiety. Try to do it with immediacy and make that gap really, really small. So you got a minute? Yeah, come in my office right now. Say, so how you doing? What's going on? So you start the conversation just by asking a general, how is it going? And then ask the question, so do you know why I wanted to chat with you? Most of the time, your employee will know why. And specifically, if it's right after an experience that just happened. So you bring them in, most of the time they'll say, yeah, I think I have an idea. And then you start by finding any positive that you can. So listen, Sally, I want to tell you that you're actually doing really good work. And the reports you're turning in have actually been very timely and they've been super accurate. The reason I wanted to chat with you is I've noticed, and that's where you start with the letter I. The pronoun should not be, I've been told, other people have seen. No, start with I. Because then there's nowhere for the employee to go. In other words, the employee cannot say, well, who said that? Well, what's going on? So you are taking ownership. I've noticed that you've been coming into work about 15, 20 minutes late with consistency for the last few weeks. And then you stop and you take a breath and let the employee acknowledge and validate and say, yeah, I have. So tell me what's going on there. Then stop and ask. What you don't want to do is come out of the box when you're giving constructive feedback, and you don't want to point a finger in the employee's face and go, you've been doing this terribly. You're not meeting expectations. You're late with this. And so I've noticed this is happening. What's going on? Stop and give the person a minute so they don't feel like it's a parental talking down, if that makes any sense. Yeah, I have been late. I've noticed that too. I can't, boss, I can't even really make an excuse for it. Say, okay, now here's where the really critical element comes in, John. This is the why part. Mm-hmm. So Sally, I'm talking to you today about this because, well, for a couple of reasons. I just told you, you're doing good work. I'm really seeing some good things from you. What I don't want for you, Sally, is to something that's controllable like this to hold you back. I see leadership potential for you. And if you can predict this and you can prepare for it, right? See what I just did there? I slipped in my old thing. If I can help you get this under control and you can meet expectations, then we can blow this up for you, right? So how can I help you? How can I help you ensure that we heal this together? So now what you're doing is you're telling her, listen, this is the why. It's not because I said so or because I'm mad. It's because there's value in it for you to change your behavior. So if you do that, then you'll get this. It's algebraic. And then you have now invited her into the process. And this is where Sally goes, oh, well, I mean, to be honest with you, boss, I guess I can stop going out so late at night. And maybe I'll set my alarm 20 minutes earlier. That's great. Okay, so when do you think you can start doing that? Well, I can start doing that tonight, boss. Okay, great. So when can I expect to see you coming in on time? Definitely tomorrow. All right, so what's going to happen if I don't see you come in tomorrow? Well, I guess we're going to have another conversation, and then we'll have to talk about a consequence. And then you see what I'm doing there? I'm not telling her anything. I'm really inviting her into her own punitive conversation. So if you don't do it in the future, what do you think should happen? Well, maybe you should start docking my pay. Okay, well, that's what we're going to start doing. So tomorrow I expect to see you at 8:55, right? Okay, super. Thanks very much. You shake hands, you agree. And I subtly threw in some SMART goals there as well. Very specific, measurable. What is it? Accurate. Reliable. Somebody out there in listening land, you're checking the SMART goals right now. And then T, of course, is timely. You don't want to have the measurable be, well, be on time in 3 weeks, Sally. No, let's do this now. Let's start this now. And then the really critical element for you as a leader is to not forget to follow up tomorrow and the next day and whatever it is. So I made that sound so simple because that was a very simple example, but that process can be done with even the most what feels like conflict-induced conversations. It's just a matter of remembering it's not about you. It's about the other person, and your responsibility as a leader is to give that feedback because your responsibility is to help that human become the best that he or she can be. And the only way to do that is to give performance feedback. And it took me a long time. It really did, to be able to practice it and not feel the feels that I felt 20 years ago giving feedback. Now it comes much more naturally, and I'm able to compartmentalize and remember right off the bat, this is for you. I'm doing this for you to help you get to the next level. So
yeah, I think that's one of the things that we struggle with sometimes is understanding that feedback is for the person you're giving the feedback for, right? It's not for us. We say, oh, well, I'll just deal with it next time. Well, no, because you're robbing them of the ability to get better. You're robbing them
Yes.
of knowing that they're doing something wrong. When I do something wrong, a lot of times I don't even know it. It's like
Yeah.
I'm oblivious to it because I'm not as self-aware as I probably should be. And, somebody can point it out and tell me how I can correct it or help me. Like you said, it's better to let me figure it out. Let me come up with the ways that I can
Yes.
correct it. Because then I learn from that. And then it's my decision to move forward. And
Exactly.
yeah, I think that's
Exactly.
one of the things as leaders, we're not coming down on them. We're helping them grow. And if we can't, help them grow, what good are we as leaders,
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I have a young woman on the staff. She's 24 years old. She's relatively new with us. She works in human resources. So we were onboarding somebody new, and I said, "You're doing it. You're facilitating it." And she looked at me terrified, and I said, "You're going to fail, and that's the point. I'm going to be right here. Go ahead and do it." So she did it, and it wasn't perfect by any means. And when it was done, she came over and I said, "Okay, so first of all, let me tell you what you did really well." And then I said, "So what do you think you could have done better?" And I immediately turned it over to her. "Well, this didn't feel right and this." And I said, "Yeah, so what I noticed was X, Y, Z. And what I would recommend to help you be more prepared is to study this and this before you do that and ask for me for help for this and the other thing. And we'll try that. How do you feel about that?" "I think that's great. Can I do this and then show it to you tomorrow?" "I think that's great." So it was all about, when you're learning, when you have an employee who is learning something new, they are desperate for the feedback. They may not think they want the feedback because it's scary, right? It's scary to feel like you're not doing something, but how can you expect somebody who's never really been in an environment before to be successful? And same, put the finger back onto yourself too, right? You just said it, John. If when you've done something wrong, when you've been doing it for a while, but when you're new to something, maybe you don't know. So you really need somebody to come over and go, "All right, so you did well. Let me give you open to some feedback right now. Good. So here's some things that we can do to help you shift and elevate a little bit." Listen, it's not easy, but it's our job as leaders to give feedback. Unfortunately, so many leaders don't realize that it is a massive part of our responsibility to give that feedback.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
my job to tell them.
And one of the things that another thing that I know I struggle with, and I have seen people, especially in technology, struggle with as they grow in leadership. Maybe they become a team lead, then they become a manager, and now they have to have regular meetings with business. Maybe they're a business stakeholder and they're meeting with their business partners on a regular basis. And a lot of times I go to those meetings and I just say, "Oh my God, why are we here? What are we trying to get out of this?" And it's such a poorly ran event and meeting. And I think it's one of the areas that we new technique leaders especially struggle with. What are some things that we can do? Because I know you have a book called The Art of Facilitation, Communicate so they can remember. What are some things that we can do so that when people leave a meeting, they're not like, "Why were we here?" They have a better understanding of what's going on, and how can we as new leaders not fail so often at this?
Isn't that the worst, John?
Absolutely.
It is the worst. And I'm debating if I should share this with you. So in 2003, I went to a meeting. Well, now I'm going to tell you because I already started. I went to a meeting at BMW North America. I just started. I was a young whippersnapper, and I was there with the company for a couple months. And BMW notoriously, at that time, it's much better, had meetings about the meetings. It was exactly as you defined. And I actually questioned what I was doing here because I didn't feel like we were adding any value. It did shift. I don't know that I would have stayed so long if it didn't. The culture did shift, but at the time it was quite painful because it's such an incredible waste of time. So there's two things. One thing popped out for me when you mentioned this, though. I'm going to stereotype IT only to make a point. I am very aware, however, that there are all kinds of different human beings and we show up differently, and not everyone in IT is exactly the same. However, if what I have seen in IT, and this is true on the tech side of the house in different organizations as well, IT humans, their behavior style a lot shows up with maybe a slow task, as we would say. If we were a DISC behavior profile, we would call them a high C, which means they want to be correct, and they are methodical in thinking, and they are linear, and they want to be, again, accurate. So to do that, they show up a certain way as a leader. That doesn't necessarily mean if somebody is wildly successful in a managerial role, as a doer role, that they should be elevated into a leadership role. And this isn't just in the world of IT, this is in any organization. So many times a company says, wow, John is doing such a good job here, let's promote him. But that's the biggest mistake, because now, as John hates it, John doesn't have the skill sets to be a leader. And John is now dying on the vine, as is the rest of the company, because we have John on the wrong seat on the bus. That doesn't mean John is a failure. It means, and I'm sorry, I'm using your name, John. I'm not pointing this directly.
Oh, no, you nailed it. You nailed it. I mean, I got promoted when I had no idea what I was doing. You know, I knew how to write code. I didn't know how to lead people. They're two very different skill sets.
You know, and this is what my company, RPC, we have a leadership academy, because there's no such thing as leadership school for people right out of college and whatnot. You can't go from A to Z. It doesn't work that way. So a lot of times we ask these leaders to run meetings. They have no clue. They've never been taught how to, but nobody asks for help, because who thinks I need help to run a meeting? You think, well, that's 101. You know, my daughter could do it. No, it's challenging. So the key, that's number one, right? Do we have people on the right seat on the bus? We have the right people leading the meeting, et cetera, et cetera. The second thing is to ask yourself, why are we having a meeting? Do we need this right now? What's the objective? And really be honest about it. What are we looking to do? There needs to be some sort of action tied to a meeting. Now, that's not to say that a meeting couldn't be a monthly company meeting where everyone is sharing, because that is important. And the action is to hear. The action is to listen to what's going on in the other departments, to ensure there's no overlap or whatever the thing is, right? So the third part is, if it is an information meeting like that, which is, you would think by definition, going to be boring, because the biggest mistake that we make is, all right, we've got all 10 of us here from all 10 different departments of this organization. What everyone does is goes, la, 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 la. Here's why I'm great. Here's what my team is doing, and they're so great. No, that is not the way to show up. First, we have to remember what we said in the beginning of this conversation, which is everyone learns differently. Everyone communicates differently. So we have to, as the leader of that meeting, remember that the people in that room are taking in information. They have different behavior styles. So we have to make sure that we're hitting all of those learning styles and all of those different behavior styles. So one thing to do, and this is really where you're going to think that I'm off, is when, especially if it's a long meeting, have kinesthetic or somatic devices on the table. Play-Doh, pipe cleaners, pens, smelly markers, because people, Dave Meyer, who wrote a book called The Accelerated Learning, he said, adults are babies in big bodies. And what he means by that is we learn with our entire brain-body connection. We need to move to retain information and to learn. So you can't have 10 people in a room doing jumping jacks, and well, actually you could if you wanted to, depending on the organization. But for the most time, that's not really acceptable. But to have people be playing with these things and fiddle-faddling with, these kinesthetic devices, and as long as they're not noisy and distracting, have at it, let them do it. They will be able to retain longer. The other idea is, for every meeting there is, put somebody else in charge and have them follow a certain template and rules of instruction. So, okay, now John's in charge of next week's meeting. And John has to make sure that there is, everyone keeps their tell to 1 minute and 42 seconds. So John is the timekeeper. And if not, then there is some sort of penalty that John has to decide on, before we go in there. So there's some levity to it. There's some fun to it, right? So there's whatever. The other part of having a meeting like this is to ensure that whatever is being said is affecting the rest of the organization. So there could be a time the marketing department, it's their turn to speak. And the only thing that Janine says is, gang, really nothing has changed. We're on course. Everything is exactly the same as it was. Next. That's all Janine needs to say. in that moment. Janine doesn't need to tell everyone how great Janine is just for the sake of telling everyone how great Janine is, right? So that's it. Pass, great, moving on. That's it. So we have to figure out what the goal is. We have to back into that by ensuring that everybody is sharing. And then I would create some avenue where you're hitting all of the different learning styles to keep people engaged. So it takes thought, John, is I think the main takeaway from this question is it takes thought and planning. Don't just walk into these monthly meetings, if that's what's going on, and sit down and just have somebody start talking. Put some energy into it, put some effort into it, change it up a little bit. Give people a reason to sit on the edge of their seat, thinking they may be called to prove their numbers or something like that. Mm-hmm. So did that help? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I could keep going, I swear, because this is where there's so many different creative ideas that we could come up with. The key is to have them, to try something different.
Yeah, I like the idea of trying something different. And I've never tried putting Play-Doh down or anything like that on the table to try to encourage that. But I like the idea of doing something different. And I think that whenever there is something unique at meetings, I know I've been to certain meetings where something was different. Those meetings, are burned into your brain a little bit.
Yes.
They are memorable.
Yes.
They do make you think differently than if you just come to the standard old meeting where someone's got a projector and they're going to show 3 slides and then we're going to ask for questions and no one's going to say anything and we're going to leave,
Yes. It's a waste of time. Statistically, nobody will remember that. They certainly won't remember it in 10 years, but they won't get out of it what the author and presenter needed them to. There's no doubt about it. There's no argument there. If you want somebody to remember what's being shared, then you have to put some energy into that. And remember, again, the learning styles and everything that we talked about. You're 100% right. And those kinesthetic devices on the table, I'll be honest with you, I've gotten chastised for that by certain fraidy cat leaders who one came to me and said, "You're being childish." That was a terrible accent that I just did right there. Again, I don't know what's my deal today with this, but he said, and I said, "Sir, with all due respect, I'm being childlike." And he didn't love that. I'll be honest with you. But that's the point. The point is, yes, it's not childish to put them out there. And if you don't want to touch them, then don't touch them. But to learn and retain, we are all big babies in these bodies, right? And that's what we are acknowledging. So if we can get beyond the air quote childish perception that you feel you might have, I promise you something like that will definitely add value into me. And to your point, John, you'll never be forgotten. That's for sure.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Tina, thanks so much for coming on the show. How can people find out more about the things that you're working on, connect with you, and pick up a copy of your book?
Yeah, the book is on Amazon. It's called The Art of Facilitation. The next book will be coming out, knock on wood, fourth quarter, called Fantastic Facilitation Fails. And that is a compilation of all my favorite facilitators and how we flopped and the lessons that we learned so you don't have to. And my company, and of course me, you can find us rpcamerica.com. And I would love to hear from all your listeners, John, big time.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate having you on the show. I feel like we've learned a lot about how to communicate, give feedback, and facilitate meetings. So thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also don't forget to check out merch. We have some t-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.